Hello, everybody. We are continuing my discussion and exploration of my UFO UAP book, a study guide for UFO UAPs, and I am tentatively titled "Handbook for First Contact." Okay, and I definitely need more coffee, but we're going to go on to talk about semiotics and its relationship to studying the UFO UAP phenomena. All right. Semiotics is the study of symbols, meaning, and interpretation of meaning and symbolism in general, and it is kind of impossible to do that without knowing aspects of the postmodernist school. And I realize a lot of you like this has been demonized by Jordan Peterson, who, I mean, folks, I've studied this at undergraduate, graduate, and PhD level. I've had to write about it and utilize these tools. Jordan Peterson is by and large lying to you, or simply doesn't know his butt from a hole in the ground when it relates to the topic. There's a lot of foundational untruths, and I I could make videos and videos about that. And knowing Jordan Peterson, he'd probably, threaten to hit me. In which case, he's a pencil neck, and his followers might want to firebomb my house because, my God, so many right wing neo Nazis and racial supremacists seem to love this guy. All right, but he's just not honest about it. Postmodernism is also the study of how, especially in language, how people derive meaning from it, because people often use the same words and have vastly different ideas and concepts about them. Like when I say the word dog, if there were a million people watching this video, which would be amazing for me, right? There would be so many different ideas of what dog is. Someone might picture a small dog, a large dog. Someone might picture something that has an acronym dog, like Yo Dog. It could be slang. I tend to picture German Shepherds and Collies. I like those kind of dogs. Um, there's wild dogs, right? And there's connotations that come with that. Some people like dogs. Some people are scared of dogs. Some people love their dogs like way too much, like they tongue kiss them, even though the dog, licks its own genitals and eats its own poop. Some people love dogs like me, but I would want a doghouse. I would not let it sleep in my bed. I would give it a nice big yard to run in and toys and a nice high fence so I don't have to worry about the dog, you know, doing something irresponsible, and I wouldn't have to put a dog collar on unless I was walking it. So that's a very specific meaning of dog. I know for sure many of you, would think that's great. Many of you would think I hate dogs because of the way I relate to them. You understand? Now, semiotics, we have to even be more careful about meaning and utilize things like a cluster of scholastic tools related to postmodernism, because symbols can be even more vague, especially if there's nothing written on them, right? And it can go deeper, because if I write something in all caps, it means something on the internet. It's almost like considered shouting, right? If I write something in a certain font or in a certain color, it all means something. Now, when it comes to things like pictures, portraits, symbols, I mean, like one thing you can tell just by looking at the tapestries behind my wall is I value sunshine, I value peaceful calmness, I value a certain type of art, um, as opposed to, if I had pictures of warfare on the wall, or, some people decorate their houses with pictures of AR-15s and things like that, and, any number of things, it all means something, right? So, semiotics can be used to understand the UAP UFO phenomenon, but I believe that, again, by looking at the literature, by listening to the podcast, looking at the interviews, the documentaries, no one really seems to be digging into this, even though by now there are mountains and mountains of data on symbolic aspects, visual aspects of the phenomena. So let's talk about it. We have actual symbols, shapes, colors, and shades of colors. Let's talk about shape. The shape of these things is by and large independent of movement capabilities. So, for example, you would expect, given our current state of technology and military science and material science, that anything capable of moving incredibly fast at speeds we can't replicate would have to be aerodynamic, but a lot of these things are not aerodynamic, which means that that function is independent of their shape. And you would also think that things that exhibit maneuverability would have things like navigational surfaces, wings, tails, rotors, attitude jets like on rockets that operate in vacuum. We don't see that, and we don't see things like exhaust and airstreams and things like that. So excuse me, just got to shift my leg, stretch it out a bit. We don't see that, so the shape appears to be very independent of function, and therefore there's a volitional component to it. Now, I am not saying that it is completely independent of function, because certain shapes may optimize certain functions, and certain shapes may be related to whatever is inside. It could be that whatever is inside requires that shape, that there is some type of machinery that is better facilitated by that shape, or it could be that there are life forms that prefer that shape or need that shape to do certain things. We don't know, or all of the above. Um, we see a lot of spheres. We see a lot of losange type things, which that has an aerodynamic component to it, more than a sphere. And there's also some really strange anomalous shapes that don't resemble anything conventional. There's geometric shapes, and there was one I recall called a cube within a sphere, which implies some type of transparency. I mean, I'm not there may be some out there that have a transparent outer shell, and then within it is that cube. And there may be things that look like a cube and a sphere sort of melded but have a solid shape, and they're opaque. But opaqueness and transparency, again, if there's not a particular function associated with them, then they're then it's volitional. There's something decided to adopt that shape. And who is that communicating to? For example, we do things symbolically with our vehicles, whether they're cars, ships, airplanes, or rockets, that communicate them. I mean, of course, we put writing on outside of airplanes. We show commercial logos. We show, entrance here. Pull this tab in case of emergency, outside and inside. And there may be aesthetics involved in that. Aesthetics as simple as they like this shape, just like some people like the way a Maserati or Lamborghini is shaped. Other people, like a Corvette, has a particular shape that I love. Never owned a car, but I'm like, if I could drive a Corvette, I'd be like that. That'd be the car I want, because I think it's beautiful. It looks sleek and science fiction-y, right? Whereas some people like huge SUVs and pickup trucks. The bigger and blockier, the better. Often to the point where it doesn't even need to be that big, but it feels good, right? It makes, by looking at that and knowing that you're inside that type of craft that looks that way, it gives you a feeling, you a motivation, reinforces certain things in you, or they may be doing it to communicate to the outside world. Like, I've seen guys with fake testicles hanging from the back of their trucks, and they're like, I'm a real man. But then to some people, that's like, wow, that guy must be insecure. Like, why would you do that? Of course, there's a phenomenon of, if I have a really cool looking car, if I have a cool looking motorcycle, I'm gonna get the chicks. I'm gonna communicate to women that I'm rich and I'm fun and I'm glamorous and I've got adventurousness. Get in my car with me, right? And it's true. A lot of women, especially young women, are more than likely, if you ask them to go for a ride, if it's a fantastic, expensive car, They might get in it, as opposed to if you pull up in a beat up Volkswagen or something, right? Um, so there's communication going within the pilot, the driver of that craft, human or otherwise. There's communication to the outside world, and then there's function. Well, there's a lot of information out there, but I haven't seen anybody collate it, put it together, and do a meta analysis, which is what you would do in the scientific community with something like that if it was important enough. And I do believe this is important. The next thing is that you can communicate values of a particular civilization, of a particular culture, or whatever constructed it. So, for example, you've got cars like Audi, and you've got cars like Chevrolet, Maserati, BMW, Bentley, and while of course the purchase and use of such a vehicle says something about the owner and the observer, it also says something about the manufacturer. A lot of these manufacturers of cars have a particular ethos, culture, doctrine, whatever you want to call it, and they like to do things within that ethos. They're more likely to, for example, the BMW is more likely to continue making a luxury car and aircraft engines than it is an e-bike. That may happen, right? I think Harley Davidson came out with an e-bike that looks a lot like a motorcycle, so they stepped out of their boundary, but they sort of stayed on brand. You understand? And so, merely by looking at a craft, you can guess about some of the values and ideas within the civilization that made it. I mean, like, one thing I can tell by looking at UFOs, UAPs, is that they're not Russian and Chinese, folks, okay? They don't look like everything else the Russians and Chinese make. They don't look like they've been made by Germans. I mean, unless it's, some of those really bizarre, like, German artists, or, something like that. Like, you've seen some bizarre European art that's abstract, cubist, things like that. I mean, I would more likely think that some of these UFOs have been constructed by Picasso than by, Mercedes Benz or the Russian and Chinese military industries. They do look that different than most of the industrial products put out there, especially when it comes to aviation. The next thing is lights and color. There have been reports of UFOs and UAPs, particularly at night, that have lights, and there's been some talk of colored lights. And it would be really interesting to gather up all of this data and try to divide it into categories and say, well, okay, we know that when aircraft fly, they have lights, especially at night. They have blinking lights. Military aircraft use a lot of red lights at night, so it doesn't ruin the pilot's night vision. Okay, and blinking lights are usually navigational lights. Excuse me. And we don't have a lot of aircraft using pulsing blue lights and purple lights, and phasing from yellow to green to red or something. So there's things that could just be regular aircraft, and there's things in the data that might be like, well, no aircraft would use that. That alone would communicate something. And from what I can tell, there hasn't been a micro or meta analysis of this. We need more meta analyses of these data, and databases set up, and maybe that's a task for AI. Okay, we're still on the semiotics. We're still on symbolic meanings, and there are color again. These things have color. I've heard about UAPs that are silver metallic, UAPs that are kind of bluish. Commander Fravor talks about these objects being white, not metallic. That alone is significant, folks. A thing that is metallic is more than likely made of some kind of metal. No? The transparent thing that doesn't look like metal, although I have heard of transparent aluminum, which was more of a Star Trek thing, but now it's reality. It's used to make bulletproof glass and things like that. Um, White objects tend to get less white over time unless they're maintained. So you could have a person with really pale skin. That skin is going to stay that color all their life because there's cellular regeneration. However, when they get really old, more blotches appear on the skin because the regeneration is slowed down. You could paint a car gleaming white, an aircraft gleaming white, but over time, it encounters environmental things and acquires color, or bits chip off of it, and it is less white as time goes by. So either what he was seeing, if it was clear white, was relatively new or is relatively maintained. Do you not understand that communicates something about the object? And I've never heard anybody talk about it, and I've never seen a meta-analysis about UFO UAP interactions that tracks color. I mean, we've been having these interactions publicly. There's a public record that has been published pretty much since the 40s, and there's talk of the Foo Fighters and lights. And again, whenever I hear about the Foo Fighters, I don't get a lot of information about what color the lights were, right? We do get information about their activity in proxemics, but I don't hear anything about the color. So this is again something that a lot of you researchers out there that have a lot more experience and resources than me, would you please, please, please do a meta-analysis of that? Because I think there's some fruit to bear. Um, in our culture, in many cultures, globally, red is considered a sign of danger because it looks like blood, and a lot of red plants and red animals have toxins in their body, acids and things like that. Black conveys one thing, white conveys another. Blue is often seen as soothing. It's very ocean-like. Green is the color of vegetation, and perceived of as relaxing. So we utilize colors all the time. You notice I like my green and my sunlight and my blue. I like to feel relaxed at home. I'm not trying to, again, blast heavy metal music all the time, right? Whereas I do have a black shirt because I feel like when I wear a black shirt, it makes me look a little thinner, right? So, things like color. And the we've had really bizarre color schemes in aviation during World War II. Pilots would put pinup girls on the outside of the airplane and fanged mouths on the nose cones of fighters, right? And it didn't necessarily intimidate the the Germans or the Japanese, but it made the pilots feel good. I mean, you're getting shot at every other day, every time you fly, and when you see the pinup girl in the airplane, puts you in a good mood. You're like, oh, beautiful girl, right? And again, it even communicates something about the people that put it there, because the women were uniformly white, often blonde haired, blue eyed, and pilots were often blonde white men of often higher status educated men, more likely to have light features. You had the Tuskegee Airmen. Somehow I don't think they they were making pictures of black women, because a lot of them weren't even pinups back then. Do you understand that by looking at that phenomenon, you could learn something about that culture? And you could do a meta-analysis of aircraft markers and identification of aircraft art and learn a lot about not just the aircraft, the people who piloted them, the people who made them, the culture. Well, again, I don't see that. Of course, you have things like color are very interesting, because skin color is relatively trivial when it comes to understanding human beings as a whole, but yet it has such an inordinate amount of impact on human interaction, to the point where there are people, if they see me, they see my hair and they see my ethnic features, This happens to me in Missouri because Missouri has a lot of racism. They on site feel anxiety upon seeing me or hostility. Some of them I just know by the, like, I see tension in the sternocleidomastoids mastoids and masseter muscles. I know there's an anger reaction, and they might even think that they might have a need to kill me or hurt me. All right, because my appearance, my racial appearance, the hair color, makes them feel a certain way based on beliefs that they have and perceptions they have, often which are not true. Uh, if you're black, right, versus if you're pasty white, versus if you're, you know, lighter or darker skinned Asian interacting in America, it really does have a huge impact on your life, your quality of life, your interactions with your fellow citizens, with authority. Again, volumes and volumes of books have been written on this, and honestly, it's fairly trivial. Listening to a person and maybe observing what they do at work will tell you infinitely more about what's going on inside their head, their place in society, than their skin color. But it is oftentimes the nonverbal signal on this planet, and it creates all kinds of problems. And we still haven't gotten over it in this country. In many ways, we're backsliding. So now just imagine if we do discover there are extraterrestrials in these things, we do talk to them, and we confirm that they do have an advanced civilization, technological civilization, advanced intellect greater than ours in morality, and they step out and they're black or brown or purple. In, even with the same morphology, I think it would cause different reactions, right? Well, same with their craft. The examination of the color of the craft can tell us about its chemical composition and so on and so forth. We're gonna get further into that in another video. I'm gonna conclude this because this is kind of went on a long time, but this concludes part 2 of chapter 3, and we're gonna move on and we're gonna talk about temporal factors and material composition and things, and I hope to get it all in. Chapter 3 is very important, and like I said, a lot of this I don't see it really being examined anywhere, and I really hope that it does get examined. See you on the next one.